Hi, this is Jake Hoffner, CTO of Qualified.
I'm Nathan Doctor, and Jake and I are the founders of Qualified, and we're next on the RecTech podcast.
Welcome to RecTech, the podcast where recruiting and technology intersect. Each month, you'll hear from vendors shaping the recruiting world, along with recruiters who'll tell you how they use technology to hire talent. Now, here's your host, the mad scientist of online recruiting, Chris Russell.
It's time once again for RecTech, the only podcast that helps employers and recruiters connect with more candidates through technology-inspired conversations. Today's show is a vendor edition. From time to time, in addition to speaking with recruiting practitioners and analysts, we'll highlight companies in our space to get their perspective on technology that helps you hire. First up, as always, today's episode of RecTech is sponsored by the team at Lever, providing a modern take on the applicant tracking system. Lever combines ATS and CRM functionality in a single powerful platform to help you source, nurture, and manage your candidates all in one place. Lever offers a branded job site, custom sourcing tools, great metrics, email and calendar integration, along with a host of other benefits that your recruiting team will love to use. Best of all, Lever's deceptively simple interface means that hiring managers and applicants will love it. To find out how Lever can help you both accelerate and humanize hiring, visit lever.co/RecTech. That's lever.co/RecTech, RecTech. Lever is where ATS meets CRM. Okay, on to our guests. Nathan and Jake, welcome to RecTech. It's good to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so I met Nathan at HR Tech last year. Nathan, what'd you think of the show?
It was great. It was quite the turnout. It was actually my first HR Tech conference, so it was really interesting to see all of the energy around the HR products.
Yeah, it probably gave you some inspiration, I assume, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of companies we work with, a lot of companies we're partnering with, a couple of our investors, so it was a good event overall.
Nice. So we'll talk about what Qualified is in a second, but you guys are calling it from the Bay Area, correct?
So Jake and I we're both in California. I'm based in the Bay Area, Jake's based down in LA.
Okay.
So we actually have an interesting company structure in the sense that a decent amount of our team is remote, but we actually started in Los Angeles, and now myself and our sales are based in San Francisco. Interesting.
Okay. Actually, I want to ask you about that remote part of it. So what's that like kind of managing a remote workforce? If you could just maybe touch on that briefly. I'm curious how you do it, maybe even a tip or two.
Yeah, so the interesting thing of how that evolved is that Qualified actually started from a community we built called Code Wars.
Okay.
And Code Wars is a community of over 500,000 developers where they take code challenges as a way to train and improve their coding skills. And so from the Code Wars community, that's actually where we got all of our best talent. So we found developers that were not only passionate about our product, but that the platform also identified as being best out there. And so in a non-geocentric fashion, we ended up taking the best developers who are dispersed across the country. So from that, we've actually come up with a very effective process for managing a remote team. Mm-hmm. It works extremely well. And it also creates the flexibility that gives everyone the lifestyle they want without having to be forced to work 9 to 5 or come into the office every day.
Gotcha. So do you have like core hours or like certain meeting dates that are always standard, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have core hours as a team where everyone's typically on during the daytime. I mean, we're a startup, so we work quite a bit. So those core hours bleed considerably. But then we do have bi-monthly stand-ups or sprint calls rather, where we actually all get together, do product calls, retask everything out, discuss how everything went, and then we do kind of morning stand-ups every day too. So for the most part, everyone's based in the U.S. We do have some outside of that, but through Slack, the other communication channels, GitHub, it's easy enough to communicate.
Yeah. Is Slack your kind of go-to communication tool as far as connecting with all your employees?
Yeah, Jake could speak to that. He's the tool guru inside of Qualified.
Yeah. Actually, Nathan gets annoyed with all the number of tools that I get constantly introduce. Just because there's so many tools out there, and you can kind of get overwhelmed with them. But We've kind of taken an approach where we really focus on. We would rather have many tools that each do their specific thing very well, as opposed to like just try to keep it one or two tools that kind of don't do really anything very well.
Yeah.
Slack is our main tool for communicating. We use Jira for project management. We also use a product called Product Board for our road mapping. and then we use Dropbox paper for our documents and our requirements. And we have all that feeding in the Slack, and sometimes, also intercom feeding in the Slack. We'll pick up conversations in different tools depending on like the focus area, but everything always goes back to Slack. So it's nice because there's always that one central point where you can kind of keep the tabs on what's going on.
Cool. Okay. Guys, a lot of your clients, are they in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Silicon Valley is right around there.
So I'm curious. I mean, it's a tough recruiting market out there. What are they telling you about the challenges of recruiting tech people, in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area out there?
So there is a range of challenges. First, talent itself is short, so there's inherently an imbalance there between supply and demand. But then at the same time, too, you have a lot of new educational initiatives, a lot of people flooding into the computer science world, which is creating a huge variance in the skill levels. So you can't trust necessarily that an entry-level or mid-level developer are who they say they are, or that they know the requisite level of skills that you may have expected from someone who had done 3 years at a company you're familiar with. So that's part of what's Qualified. What we're solving is that we found there's a $22,750 problem that companies are dealing with. And what this looks like is they're spending that amount of money, around $23,000 per hire. And this is in the form of lost engineering productivity. And what that means is that for every engineer that a company actually hires, there's typically this 110-1 rule where you have to actually go through 100 applicants, interview or on-site 10 of them, and then you'll actually make one hire. And so for all of those 100 applicants, there's so many engineers out there that don't exactly fit the company's own mentality, or they don't have the requisite skills, or not familiar with the correct technologies. And that's a really large burden on a company's engineering team. So that engineering team, instead of actually building product, now has to make sure that they're interviewing and evaluating all of these 100 candidates. So that's really where Qualified comes in terms of cutting that cost down so that companies, engineering teams can focus what they do best, building product, and we can help them identify and highlight the best engineers out there.
Okay. So what is Qualified? Take us through a description of it, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So Qualified is the most effective platform for assessing engineers. And what that looks like is we fit into typically a company's hiring process, where that company, in hiring or pulling through all of the different engineering candidates, sends them through the Qualified platform, tests out their coding skills from either the language level, general computer science, all the way down to very specifics. The specifics like frameworks, Ruby on Rails, React, Angular, whatever it is, the technology that company works with. So Qualified is really an assessment platform. And like I'd mentioned, we grew out of the Code Wars community that we had built, where we had developed this challenge coding format for training purposes and ended up realizing that it was a really strong correlation to skill. And it was a great way of evaluating and identifying top talent. So with Qualified, companies are not only improving and streamlining their hiring process, but they're also able to find the best talent out there and find the best talent that's fit for them. Because that's the other interesting thing about engineering is that outside of the engineering community, people don't realize this as much, but a great engineer doesn't fit at every company and they don't fit in every role. And so with Qualified, we can help to really ensure that the company is getting someone that fits within their context.
Yeah. Okay. When did the company launch, guys?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story too. We started as Code Wars a few years back now, so like 4 or 5 years. And we actually, me and Jake, met at a startup weekend, a hackathon down in Los Angeles. And that's where we come up with the idea. We put together a team, built a prototype over the weekend, and that's where we met our first 2 angel investors, Paige Craig and Brian Lee. And they backed Code Wars. We built that into a community. We now have a thriving community with that. And then Qualified, we only recently launched beginning of this past year, 2017. And so that technology grew out of the infrastructure we built for Code Wars and all of the learnings we had from that. And with the Qualified product, we bundled it into a SaaS application that works really well within companies. And then it also is used by educators as well.
Nice. What was that moment like when you got your first paying customer?
It was a good feeling. I mean, it was, I guess it was less so the first paying customer and more so, I would say something like the 50th or 100th.
Yeah.
To the point where we were cash flow positive. And that was a big relief. That was, I think in every startup's life, there's this interesting inflection point where you go from, as Paul Graham puts it, default dead to default alive. And being default alive is definitely a good feeling. And you know that you're onto a real business and it gives you a lot more bandwidth to really focus on what matters.
Nice. So there's a couple other, I guess tech assessment tools out there. HackerRank comes to mind. What makes you guys different from those guys?
Absolutely. So there's a few tools, HackerRank, Codility, that have been in the marketplace for a long time now. And the interesting thing about both of those tools is the big difference there is how they actually test their developers. So with HackerRank and Codility, they're using a format called standard in, standard out, where they're parsing that code and testing in a generic way. So they're able to test for specific coding languages like JavaScript, Java, Ruby, Python, etc., but they're not actually able to test for those language-specific skills. So they can test the general computer science concept, they can test your understandings of specific algorithms, mostly like computer science level things that aren't technology-specific, but they don't actually go deeper into being able to test at the language level skills that are fundamental to each specific language, and then even deeper to that, which is the framework level of being able to test these frameworks like Angular, React, Node, all three of which are built on JavaScript, or other ones that are built on other languages. Qualified, on the other hand, we actually built our system from the ground up with really the developer in mind. So we didn't start this as an assessment tool. So we didn't come at it as, this is what we need to do, this is the problem we're solving, and how do we do that as quick as possible. We rather came at it from the perspective of, we're building a resource for the tech engineering community, and we want to make sure this is as close to the real world as possible. Yeah. So what we did is we integrated what's called a unit testing framework. And so a unit testing framework is the de facto way of testing code. Every large company you've heard of typically are using unit tests when they push code to production. Okay. And the reason there is when you're writing so much code and updating that code, it's really easy for it to break or to be incorrect or operate in a way that you didn't expect. And so the unit tests, they ensure that that code does what it's meant to do. And so we take this de facto standard for testing code, integrate it into our assessment platform, which was a lot of effort because there's different unit testing frameworks for each language, and there's popular ones as well as less popular ones. But in integrating that into our platform, that's what not only provides our developers a really streamlined, seamless experience, but also allows the company to get insight into language-specific, framework-specific, and technology-specific skills that these other platforms can't support.
Okay. What are some of the specific languages and frameworks that you test for? Can you tell us some of those?
Yeah, of course. We test for pretty much every major language, so ones that are really esoteric, like Crystal, but we test all the major ones as well: JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Java, C, C++, C#. And we also have a lot of functional programming on the platform, Haskell, Clojure. So it's really across the entire range. We can even test for things like MySQL, as well as Bash.
Will this tech eventually be used in other skill sets beyond technology, or is it strictly just something for tech, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're very much of the ethos that software is eating the world, so tech is starting to touch every industry, and that's reflected in our client base too. We have a lot of companies that are completely non-traditionally tech. For example, Domino's uses our platform, and while you wouldn't necessarily correlate pizza to coding, there is a lot of engineering that goes on there between their application, their website, the app to actually order. So we're finding that engineering is really touching all of these companies, regardless of what industry they're in. So the platform itself will really stick more on engineering, software development at the moment, coding skills, and I think as we expand that out, the focus will be less so on going into completely different verticals like sales, et cetera, but rather touching on all the disciplines around technology, because that breadth is exploding really quickly. Yeah. The amount of sub-disciplines within inside of engineering, everything from AI to machine learning to art to DevOps, et cetera.
Interesting. Okay. Can one of you walk me through the kind of the user experience from a recruiter's perspective in terms of how they would use the tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really built the tool, interestingly enough, from two perspectives. One, how do we create the best developer experience possible, which is going to correlate to really high quality engineers because you're actually getting their actual skill sets. And then on the other side, how do we create the most intuitive experience possible so that the recruiters who are typically non-technical within the company can still use this platform highly effectively and get up and running really quickly. So what it looks like when a recruiter comes to the platform is they sign up for a trial, or if they already have an account, come inside. And then they'd be able to select either a series of assessments off the shelf, assessments that we've put together for specific skills. So for example, we have a mid to senior level Ruby on Rails assessment, we have a general programming assessment, we have an entry level programming assessment, software development fundamentals assessment that we've put together and created from all of the research and time we've put into assessing engineers and seeing what works and how that correlates to on-the-job success. So the recruiter would then be able to select one of those off. They'd now have an assessment up and running, and then it's quite simple from there. They just invite the candidate through the platform or a series of candidates, and the candidate would get the link in their inbox. They would go to the actual assessment, and they'll get a full in the browser coding environment that they can actually complete the assessment in. And that includes the coding window, the unit testing frameworks I'm going to actually work with, the problem description, and they'll go through and complete. Typically, there's 2 to 5 different coding challenges in each one of these assessments, testing for different skill sets. And then as they complete that, they'll have an idea of how well they performed, and they'll submit it back to the company. There's also a few other ways companies can get set up. They can actually select from a library of challenges that we've created in there. They want to craft their own assessments. Or if the engineering team is setting it up and they really want to get specific about what they're testing, they can write their own assessments from the ground up. And so using unit tests, they can write something that's either highly relevant to their company or that they've found to work really effectively in their own hiring process. Then from there, there's all sorts of review tools that once that assessment's actually submitted for both the recruiters to see a 0 to 100% score, so a completion score of how well they did, as well as top-level statistics on how the candidate performed compared to other candidates, so performance benchmarking, percentile statistics, and then the engineers can actually even watch a playback of the code, so they can see the code as the candidate was writing it, which gives them a really good feel for the candidate's thought process. So now they have the almost same or as powerful of an experience as coding with the candidate and pair programming with them, but within a fraction of time.
Okay, great. Jake, you're the CTO, so tell me, how do you spot a good developer versus a bad one? What are some of the traits that you look for kind of on a personal level?
Yeah, so I really want to look at their critical thinking skills. We want to focus not just on how well they code, but kind of how they adapt to the situation. They want to be flexible, and you want to give them a number of different testing situations and scenarios and see how they handle. So maybe in one case, you want to give them some code that is kind of a bit of a larger code base. They're kind of just adding one thing to it instead of kind of building out the whole thing, and then seeing how well they adapt to that and how well they can not just understand the code, but also add a new feature on top of it that adapts well within what's there instead of kind of just, if you ask 10 developers to create a solution for something, you're going to get 10 very different solutions. So it's really important in a code base to have somebody who's able to kind of work with the team and make sure that they can adapt to the style of the team, or they don't just kind of force their design into something that's kind of designed a little bit differently.
Right.
So we have to look for that. Other things is we have to look for their ability to solve problems. Obviously, everything in software development is basically centered around solving a problem. Yeah. So you want to try to focus on the types of problems that you're solving as a company, and you really want to see if they adapt to those well, and if they're how they think through those. Which is why I like one of my favorite features of the platform is the ability to review their code, like in Playback, like what their thought process was.
Oh yeah.
So even if they did it, on their own, you can kind of go offline. You can go back and kind of see their thought process and try to see how they came to the solution, which is really
it'll actually show you as they're typing. It'll kind of play it back for you.
Yeah, and you can play it back, and you can, you don't want to, if it took an hour to do it, you don't want to take an hour to watch them, but you can play it back like maybe 5 or 10x speed. And you can just kind of see the code kind of quickly evolve, and you can get an idea for the thought process. And that's really important. Other things is you just want to see how well they make decisions. I mean, that's the other aspect of problem solving, which is really kind of what a developer is doing all day long, is they're actually making tons of decisions every day. I mean, everything from naming a variable to, what design they should choose, and how that design will impact not just the code itself, like locally what they're doing, but how it will impact the application. So you really want to try to, focus on giving them opportunities to present themselves and how they can make decisions, both on a smaller level and on a larger level, and kind of see how they do there.
Nice. Okay. So either of you can answer this, or both if you like. But what have you learned about the overall recruiting process, and sort of especially tech recruiting since you started Qualified? Does anything stand out to you?
Yeah, it's actually not nearly as simple as you would think it would be. I think going into it, I think we had some, every company starts with this kind of perfect ideal of how their solution is going to solve a problem. And when you get into it, I think every company really has their own unique process, and every company has their own unique culture and their own unique identity of what they're looking for in people. And so you really need to be able to create a solution that adapts to all those different situations, and you don't want to try to force them into doing anything that is too restrictive, or trying to distill what you think their recruiting process should be. And so that's been the biggest thing, at least from my perspective, as we focus on building out the product, has been making sure that there's a solution there that can work for everyone.
Yeah. Hey, Jake, when you were...
Beside that, just to add another point, is that we've also realized that on top of these companies' recruiting processes being really unique and personal, is that it's also extremely surprising the amount of time and effort that companies haven't put into designing their recruiting process. For the most part, when you're hiring engineers and designing that recruiting process, people are in charge of it. That's not their main job function. That's not really their main goal within the company. It's kind of a side effect of growth that they have to deal with. And there's just not a lot of really deep thought that's been put into how do you most effectively find and evaluate engineers, such that some companies and some ways of actually testing development skills and actually assessing for engineers are kind of counterintuitive and honestly not the best practice.
Gotcha. So that candidate experience, I guess you're hinting at there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of us have heard, if you've been on Reddit, or there's a lot of developers that have complained about the process they've gone through and having to deal with challenges or whiteboarding that they would never encounter in the real world.
That's interesting. Good stuff, guys. Last question for you. So I talked to a lot of HR tech startups in my travels. What advice do you have for someone who's thinking about starting their own HR tech startup? What kind of nuggets of information could you tell them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that for us, we're interesting in the sense that we came at this more from the community engineering side and then ended up in the HR tech world. And from doing that, what I would really advise anyone that's getting into HR tech as a company, as a business, is to really understand the space first. It can be kind of counterintuitive at times, and I think whenever you're working with a large company, whenever there's bureaucracy involved, incentive structures aren't always very clear. And that really changes how a business operates. It changes what makes a business successful versus not. Sometimes the most successful HR businesses aren't the ones that actually solve the problem the best, but they're ones that understand companies' cultures and structures and how they operate the best. So I think with HR tech, it's more so than many industries, really important to know your customer and know the context you're solving the problem within, and not just the problem itself.
Good stuff. Well, we'll end on that note. Nathan and Jake, thanks very much for your time today. Tell everyone where to go and find out more information about you and Qualified.
Yeah, they can head over to qualified.io is our website. We also have a blog.qualified.io. And if anyone wants to shoot us an email with any more questions, feel free to reach out to either of us, Nathan at qualified.io or Jake at qualified.io. Awesome. Thanks so much for having us on, Chris.
No problem, guys. And we'll link to you in the show notes as well. Appreciate the time. That's going to do it for this edition of the RecTech Podcast. Thanks again to our sponsor. Remember to check out lever.co/RecTech for your ATS needs. You can subscribe to this show via iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and now Stitcher Radio. Hey, if you like the show, please leave a review on your channel of choice. I'd love to see your feedback or mention us on social media with the hashtag RecTech. Follow me on Twitter at Chris Russell or visit rectechmedia.com. You can find the audio and links for this show on our blog. Just a reminder, I'm a consultant that helps both HR tech firms and employers get more clients or candidates. Thanks for listening, everyone.